welcome to another episode of Mental Health for Creative Minds, the podcast where we explore the intersection between mental health and the creative industries. I'm your host, Jessica McGann, and today I am joined by Shaina Fawn, a licensed clinical social worker with nearly 2 decades of experience across various sectors, including child welfare, hospice, medical social work, and integrated care. Shaina is not only the founder of Therapeutic Bridge, a private practice based in Los Angeles focusing on the well-being in personal and professional spaces, but is also the founder of Wellbeing in Creative Art and Entertainment, also known as WECA, a nonprofit aimed at promoting trauma-informed support within the entertainment industry. Shaina is dedicated to supporting film industry professionals with their mental health, so much so that she is currently working on a PhD dissertation exploring mental health and well-being for workers in the entertainment sector. In this episode, Shaina addresses the critical mental health issues that are alarmingly prevalent in the entertainment industry, such as high rates of anxiety, depression, suicide, and substance abuse. With her extensive background, we discuss the importance of trauma-informed care and how we can prevent re-traumatization not only on our sets, but also in post-production. Shaina discusses the effectiveness of mental health first aid training and advocates for the implementations of measures that promote a healthier work-life balance, such as shorter workdays, please, and self-care plans. So join me and Shaina as she shares valuable insights, practical advice, and shares her ongoing research aimed at improving the support systems for those working in high-pressure environments, such as the entertainment industry. Let's dive in. Shaina, I am so excited to have you today on the Mental Health for Creative Minds podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk about something that I'm just really, really passionate about. So thanks for having me.
Clearly, you have so much experience in this field, so I'm really excited to hear some of your insights in this conversation. And I'm curious, what drew you to the arts and entertainment sector?
Yeah, so my partner of 14 years is acting professional, creative professional. His background is theater. And then we actually moved to Los Angeles together in 2013. He got an agent out here and just really that kind of set us off on the trajectory of being, LA people. And so we've lived here for a decade now and just, I feel very much like adjacent to the entertainment industry. I consider myself an artist and a creative, but it's not something that I do professionally. But I've worked with a lot of people, both sort of personally and professionally, who are creatives in Los Angeles who are pursuing this as their career. And it's always been a conversation between my partner and I. And I think the seed for WECA, our nonprofit, was really planted maybe like 14 years ago when we started dating and having these conversations around how the work that we do is so similar, truly.
I agree. Like wholeheartedly. I agree. Because I have my background is in acting and theater. And I remember going through my life coaching diploma and realizing there was so much similarities between my acting program and the things that I was learning in my coaching program.
Yes.
I remember my teacher literally telling us, I am training you to be professional human beings. And I genuinely had no idea what that meant at the time, but it's begun to land for me. So much of the skills you learn are about human, like reflection and empathy and seeing things from another perspective and putting yourselves in someone else's shoes. Really valuable skills as just human beings.
Absolutely. It's really interesting. I know we're gonna maybe touch on this later, but I'm in a PhD program right now, and I'm taking a summer elective course on Jungian depth psychology, which I don't know if you know much about Carl Jung. I highly would recommend like checking him out. My mind is being totally blown in terms of this, sort of old crusty white man who did a lot of really great things for the field of psychology, but also like has obviously some problematic like ways of, I think, I don't know, he was a man of his time, whatever. But a lot of really interesting stuff around creativity and healing. And he believed that like the very first kind of healers, or the first creatives and healers, were like the shamans and like people in like communities who, you know, were tasked with kind of like community care for people.
Mm.
And just like the sort of overlap between healing and storytelling and dancing and singing and like all of these things. So yeah, there's just really beautiful parallels between people who are drawn to creative arts as like a profession and people who are drawn to mental health as a profession. I think the two are very, very intertwined in more ways than we typically talk about. So
I couldn't agree more. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about the mission and the vision of the WECA and how it aims to support individuals in the entertainment industry.
yeah, so we kind of have sort of an audacious vision, but we envision an entertainment industry that's guided by trauma-informed principles. And so I know we're going to talk maybe a little bit about what that means, but really an industry where the health and safety of well-being and artists are prioritized and kind of throughout the entire creative process from pre to post-production. And so the way that we envision doing this is we envision becoming the premier hub of well-being and entertainment in the United States, and maybe even broadening that to, you know, work with our friends and sisters and colleagues in Canada and maybe even Mexico, and creating kind of a North American sort of coalition.
Mm.
But really, we are working to decrease mental health stigma, increase access to support, and hopefully eventually establish standards for well-being in the industry. And so right now we are developing resources, trainings. We have a resource hub on our website where we have toolkits and pre-recorded sessions. We have a course that we also created, a well-being essentials course. And we're looking to partner with productions to provide risk assessment, consultation, and then, of course, uplift ongoing mental health research in this field. So our goals are broad and big, but we're dreaming really big about, I don't know, a better future, like how this could be different. It doesn't have to be the way that it is currently. And I think the more that we have these conversations, you know, between you and I and others, the more we're learning that there are really a lot of people who are devoted to doing this work and doing it well and doing it in a way that's collaborative and not competitive and not toxic in the ways in which a lot of the industry operates currently. So that's kind of WECA in a nutshell. We formulated in 2022, and we are currently all volunteer run at this time. We are looking to expand and are applying for some grants to hopefully get some funding to be able to like scale and maybe even hire staff. But that's our small but mighty little nonprofit here in Los Angeles.
I love that. And I can see a similarity in between the work that we do and in like an eagerness to provide resources to educate people on how they can care for themselves in this really oftentimes toxic, overwhelming, high demand industry. Cause like the thing for me is that like the industry tells you to be tough. They tell you like, you know, it's very demanding. It's very stressful. You need to be thick skinned to tough it out, but they don't tell you what that looks like, what that means, or trains you with the skills to be able to do that. It's kind of talked about as either you have it or you don't. Whereas in my education training, these are actual skills that you can learn and you can practice. And honestly, there's stuff that we should have learned in elementary and high school, and we're not. So we're bringing that to these sets now. And I love that we have that similar goal. What I hear a lot of the time is therapy. Like we need more therapy. We need more therapy. And look, I love therapy. I've been going to therapy my whole life. But no one
Yeah.
has time for a 60-minute trauma therapy session in the middle of a workday. We need actual applicable skills and resources that we can whip out at a moment's notice to make it through those tough moments or critical conflicts that are holding up production, you know?
I just wanted to touch on, you know, there's nothing wrong with being tough skinned and being, kind of tough and gritty and being able to like ride out difficulty, right? Like that's sort of
Yes.
the opposite of trauma is what we call resilience, right? And so there's nothing wrong with being resilient. Like that is a great quality to have. And often that's kind of what trauma ends up building. I think the major problem is like that's an expectation of the industry, but there's no support to be able to help people be
Yes.
more resilient. And so I think that's really where we can do some more work is like, okay, how do we help people build resilience and how do we take care of their trauma in order to build that resilience?
Yes, 100%. What are the common mental health challenges that you've noticed that creative professionals in the entertainment industry do face on a more regular basis?
Yeah, wow, what a question. So there's a lot of really good research studies that you can look at that can kind of give you sort of an idea of this. There's one that I really like to reference a lot, which is the Looking Glass survey based out of the UK. They did an initial study in 2020, right before the pandemic hit, and they're doing consecutive kind of follow-up longitudinal studies. So they found that 55% of entertainment workers at the time of looking at surveying this population, 55% of them had thought of suicide. And I believe that's like 3 times higher than the national average, if I'm quoting that correctly.
55%. That is a shocking number. I'm sorry, I'm just processing that.
Yeah.
Like that's over half. That's over half of our industry.
Yeah. Yep. And then to kind of piggyback on that, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in the states in 2020, this is very, state specific, but found that the entertainment industry ranked number 3 in suicide deaths. It's the third
Oh my
highest
gosh.
industry. So really
Wow.
upsetting. And these are things that like we see when we see celebrities or people with big names, kind of Matthew Perry is a recent one. That
Robin
we
Williams
talked.
broke my
Robin
heart.
Williams. Oh
Broke
my
my
God,
heart. Ugh.
totally. But there, for every like big name celebrity, there's countless number of entertainment workers who are also struggling with this, and it's just not talked about enough.
I had a friend of mine that I worked with on a regular basis open up to me that they had attempted suicide on a project that they were working on. And knowing that they not only thought about it, but they tried, shattered
Oh,
me. Like I had no idea. And it's just heartbreaking how many people in this industry are struggling in silence
yeah.
and don't see a way out, because that's what stress does to us, right? It really narrows in our vision and it feels like the problem is right up close to your face. And it's so hard to see anything else, any freedom from it. And it's too many people are suffering in silence. But
Absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
that's wild.
Thank you for sharing. I'm so sorry about your friend. And
Sorry, from what you said, it's just far too common.
it's far too common. And I think what kills me as a mental health professional is like, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way.
I agree.
And that's what, tugs at my heartstrings and really gets me in my fields is like, there are things that we can be doing to support people that are pretty simple, and I think one of the most simple things that we can do is we can talk about it. And so I think that that's, it needs a light. It needs people to talk about it openly, and like we need to decrease the stigma. And the only way that we really do that is through talking about it in education. But that's not enough, right? That's the first step. And then we need tools and resources, and we need a safety net for people. But yeah, it really doesn't have to be this way. And it's like, it's just heartbreaking and awful. So
We created the system. I was talking to a fellow producer at a dinner recently, and I was talking about like the toxicity in this industry and my belief around that we are, trying to create positive mental health change. And my hope is that toxic leaders who create really toxic sets will not be welcomed back, that there will be new standards that are put in place. And so people who do have those reputations, who are losing jobs because of their attitudes, they need to start really reflecting and doing this work, even just for their own job security. And the response that I got was, that's just the way the industry is. These people will always work. And I was just shocked at how people don't even consider that there's no hope. And the hope is like where we have to actually start. If we don't believe that this is possible, then it won't ever be. We have
Yeah,
to believe that it is possible in order for us to make those moves and make those decisions to make that reality possible for us, correct?
absolutely. And I think like there are people doing it and doing it well already. And I think those are the people who are going to be the leaders. I think of Ava DuVernay in the States, who on the set of when They See Us had therapists available. I think of Barry Jenkins, who created the Underground Railroad, also had therapists on set. These are really the movers and shakers. These are the people who are saying like, no, we're not okay with the status quo and it doesn't have to be this way. So for everyone who says it's never going to change, I look to the people who are actually making the change, and it's happening. It's not happening as quickly as I think we want it to or need it to, but it's happening.
Were you on that presentation recently? It was
Documentality, was that it?
yes. Yeah,
In the
Documentality did an amazing presentation, and over 500 people were in attendance, and it was really so confirming to be in that presentation, not only hearing their findings and their research, but also seeing the chat on the side of producers and change makers in this industry from all over the world participating and wanting these resources and wanting to make this change. Like if you think that change isn't happening, I promise you it is. Like there are people like us who are passionate about finding these resources. So I believe
absolutely.
it's going to happen.
It's happening. And I wanted to just shout out also Kathy Olson and Hollywood in Mind, who I just attended a summit a few weeks ago, actually. It's the second annual summit, Hollywood in Mind.
Okay.
Um, and it made me realize that this change is happening. Like it really absolutely is. There were people there, there was like 12 different sessions, people from all over the industry, who are really wanting to collaborate to make this change. So anyone who tells you it's not happening, they have a reason. They have a motivation for telling you that, or they're just really jaded. But I think we have to look at the change makers, because it is happening.
I agree.
I just wanted to highlight a couple more just
Please.
statistics I thought were important. So the same Looking Glass survey found that 75% of workers surveyed experienced panic attacks or anxiety symptoms.
Mhm.
I think that's low, actually. I think it's probably closer to like 100% of people, especially post-pandemic, are just experiencing anxiety, social anxiety. And then you add, entertainment work on top of it. And I think it's probably a lot higher.
In
Yeah.
my personal experience, and I'm always just very happy to be vulnerable, but like in my 8 years of working in film, I've had 2 panic attacks on set. One I suffered in silence by myself in a bathroom, and the other, someone found me in a bathroom and I gave me support in that moment. But they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know what was happening. It's very scary. And I have assisted cast and crew with their panic attacks post my training. And I'm so grateful to have those skills, because a panic or an anxiety attack is extremely scary and it is
It is.
extremely painful.
It is. And people think they're having a heart attack and dying. No, it's how it feels.
Oh, I've
And it
had my whole right side of my body go numb. And like I literally thought I was having a heart attack. It's a very scary experience, especially if you've never had one before.
yeah. They also found that 64% of workers struggled with depression. So that's also pretty I also think that's kind of low, but pretty common. You think of all of the exacerbating factors for causing that number to be so high. You think of gig workers who aren't really sure where their next paycheck's going to come from. They don't have health insurance. They don't have like that sort of stability. Um, you think of like projects ending, right? Like, projects that you poured your whole heart and soul into, and then it just ends, and kind of that depression and grief that comes along with it. Um,
Especially even for performers, because there is such a high and a rush that comes from being on stage, that
yes,
if you have a long run of something, to suddenly, like, this is mainly, I guess, for theater performers, but when you lose that and you're separated from that, it can feel like almost like a withdrawal, like a drug
absolutely.
withdrawal, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, and like you even think of like people who go out for auditions and then they don't get a call back, right? Or they get pinned, but then they kind of like drug along and then they eventually get dropped. Or stories of people like showing up to set, sitting in a trailer and then like getting dropped, right? And their scene doesn't even get filmed. Like there's all these like moments, I think, of grief that happen in this work that then I think can cause this like really intense depression that follows.
And that, to add to that, like the inner experience, because that's a thing, right? Like we know that rejection is a part of this industry. You have to be good with managing rejection. And then you get rejected and you feel that grief. Like people feel that grief, but then they suppress it, being like, nope, this is a part of what it is. I just need to suck it up, without giving themselves a moment to like feel the disappointment, to
Yes.
process the unmet expectations in that moment, and to reconnect to, I've got this, it's coming for me, whatever that feeling may be. Like there's healthy ways for us. It doesn't always have to be a suppression and a I'm fine, this is a part of it, I'm tough, I can do this, like there's better ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that that kind of ties into the last statistic that I wanted to share, is that they found that 41% of workers used alcohol to deal with work-related stress and trauma and triggers. And so you think of like that kind of that reaction of just like holding it in, like I got this, or like it's not bothering me. And then you think of how people cope, and often they reach for the bottle or they reach for the substance, right? And so there's a lot of like substance use and abuse that happens as a result of like this unchecked and untreated and unsupported like mental health stuff that could just be resolved by talking about it and having space. Like
Mhm.
having space and giving yourself space, and having people professionally give you space and honor that. Um, but so often it's not there. And so then people cope with unhealthy coping skills. It's what humans do. And it's pretty rampant in this industry in particular.
What are some of the trauma-informed resources that you bring to the set to address some of these issues?
Yeah. So I want to just back up a little bit before I answer that question, because I want to just kind of define what trauma-informed care is, because a lot of people like don't really know. And I just think it's important to kind of just highlight.
Mhm.
So at least in the States, trauma-informed care is something that's kind of sort of taken off in healthcare in particular, and in education. And it's one of the kind of ways in which I think we can help improve the industry, is the entertainment industry, is by bringing these principles to the entertainment industry. So there's four main principles of trauma-informed care. The first one is recognizing the impact of traumatic experiences. So recognizing what um, happens basically to our bodies when we experience trauma,
Mhm.
and how it can sort of impact an individual sort of over the lifetime, their lifetime. The second one is recognizing signs and symptoms. So kind of educating people on like what does it look like if someone is maybe re-experiencing trauma or gets triggered? What are some of these symptoms of trauma that we talk about? Re-experiencing hypervigilance, nightmares, kind of what are the symptoms of having our nervous system ramped up all the time, right? And being able to recognize those signs and symptoms in ourselves and also others. The fourth principle is being able to respond appropriately with policy, procedure, that really kind of like understands like, okay, these are maybe areas where people can experience trauma or maybe become re-traumatized, and this is how we are going to address it. Specifically, these are the policies that we're going to put in place, or like our process that we're going to put in place to be able to support people. And I can talk a little bit about what some of those things are.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last principle is like actively avoiding re-traumatizing people, which becomes really interesting in an industry where we are asking people to put their trauma on display for everyone else.
Or push it to the side, or
Or push
just
it
to suck it up because you are the camera operator or the lighting tech or the producer of whatever scene. So you need to, it's just a scene. It's just a scene. They're pretending. Why can't you just suck it up? Like,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And so I think the fifth principle, which isn't really in the conversations yet around trauma-informed care, but I think is really important, especially in this industry, is when re-traumatization occurs, because it's going to occur, how do we repair? How do we hold space for, and how do we repair? How do we understand that by doing this work, we are going to be opening people up to trauma? Like it's part of what happens when we tell human stories, right? Like people are going to get traumatized. A lot of times people don't even know their triggers or that something's traumatic until something happens. And then it's like, whoa. So how do we repair? How do we help people sort of afterwards? So I think there's some really easy, simple kind of methods and tools that people can use to bring some of these trauma-informed principles to sets and stages. And I think one of them is just starting from the beginning, like even in pre-production, like looking at a script, what are potential area and highlighting what are potential areas where people can experience trauma or triggers.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of story are we telling? Is this story going to be mirrored in some of the people that are going to be working on this project? And then, so recognizing that, and then having a conversation with folks around it, like, hey, we're going to be telling a story of a woman who had a miscarriage. Maybe you've experienced a miscarriage, or maybe your partner has experienced a miscarriage. You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
this might be a source of trauma for you, or a source of kind of grief that comes up. If that does, these are some things that are in place for you. Having like a quiet space where people can go, like a sort of meditation room or like a meditation space, or like just a quiet space that everyone kind of honors as like, this is a space for decompression. Have some like fidget tools in there, have maybe some like aromatherapy, some nice music going, and just kind of have that be a space for people.
Like a designated wellness space is what you're suggesting. It doesn't
Yeah,
need to be that you're going to see or speak to a therapist. There doesn't need to be shamed around the space, but it's what I'm hearing is a dedicated space for people to disconnect from the things that they're doing on set and reconnect and ground within themselves through
yeah,
little fidget toys or whatever resources you can put into that space. Suggest.
yeah, totally. And I think like signposting, or like either like visuals, or maybe at the beginning of each day, during the safety briefing, like, we're going to be shooting this scene today. It might be kind of traumatic. If you start feeling this in your body, your nervous system might be kind of getting ramped up, and we have these things in place for you. We have this quiet designated area for you. We have this mental health first aider on set who's available. We have this process group that happens at the end of every week. We encourage you to show up so you can talk about what's coming up for you. There's just like tiny little things that I think can add up to sort of bigger support. And it doesn't have to cost that much money either. We hear that all the time, like, oh, there's not enough money. And it's like, there's enough money.
It really doesn't take that much to make these differences. It's about how we show up in these spaces. It's how we
Yeah.
show up for ourselves and for each other in these spaces. I'm picking up what you're saying of having those safe people on sets. And that's what I really try currently to bring into my sets, is like, I really try and make it known that, if you are struggling, like, this is what I love helping people with this. Please come up to me and talk to me if you are struggling. And I know we're going to get there later in this conversation, but that's why I've been really pushing for mental health first aid in these productions, because the more people who have this awareness and this trauma-informed training, who can be extra eyes while you're traveling for the show, you're hitting multiple locations, things are happening on the fly, that they can be there for a sudden trigger or
Yeah,
something occurring on that set and be an additional resource. We don't need always therapists. We just need someone with the skills to help people recenter in these
absolutely.
moments.
Absolutely. Yeah, that brings up like a really interesting thing that I think about a lot. And this is like sort of one of my soapboxes. So I'm gonna
Get on
subject you I'm
it.
gonna subject you to this. Is I think there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens in general, where it's like this is our space and like no one is allowed to be here. And I think the entertainment industry does that. I see the mental health industry do that a lot. And so I just want to say, like, as a mental health professional, I think there are times where having a therapist on set or available is absolutely warranted, but there's a lot of other options too. It doesn't have to be that. There's so many things that we can do, and I think like in order to respond to this post-COVID world that we're living in, which is where COVID has really become now a mental health crisis across the world, we need all hands on deck. We need all people who have any type of like healing um calling or skill to be available and to support one another. It can't fall just on mental health professionals or therapists or people with like a PhD or a master's degree, because there's just simply not enough of us. So we need to really be giving everyone tools to be able to meet the need. And I think that's one of the ways in which mental health first aid can be really impactful. So in your experience, how often are people on set required to have CPR training?
I think it varies based on the production companies that I've worked with.
Yeah.
We have medical professionals on every set. So we have like a medical team. So those people would be, and I've seen them in action. They do very good with their training.
Yeah.
And I know of a couple productions that have their APs certified in CPR, but standard wise, I don't think it's a requirement for an everyday producer, coordinator, or PA to have that training.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I often think of mental health first aid is like CPR, but for the brain or for mental health or substance use like crises. And so I often think of like that question, like how often are CPR certified people required to be in a certain space? Because I think often we as society kind of put physical health and safety over mental and emotional and psychological health and safety.
Mhm.
Um, but really, mental health first aid is CPR for mental health issues. And so it's really a training that anyone can take. You don't have to be a mental health professional. You can just be a person living and interacting with other individuals who can receive this training. And so this training teaches you how to identify and respond to signs of a mental health or substance use crisis or challenge. It gives you the skills to be able to reach out to someone and be able to provide that sort of initial support and initial help. We know that that initial kind of reach out is such an opportunity to help get people connected. So mental health first aid doesn't train you to be a therapist. It doesn't train you in like therapeutic modalities or how to heal trauma or anything like that. It teaches you how to recognize and respond so that that person has that safety net, so that they have someone they can connect with. And it kind of takes the fear and hesitation out of starting these conversations around mental health and substance use issues. So often people are like, I don't want to touch it. I don't know how to handle it. I don't want to touch it. It's a can of worms I don't want to open, whatever. This kind of helps take the hesitation out and helps people build confidence in their skills that like they can have these initial conversations. They can listen non-judgmentally, give reassurance, explore what kind of supports there are available for that person. And very often that is life sustaining life sustaining support. just like CPR is kind of life-sustaining support, mental health first aid is that same life-sustaining support. And it's taught, there's various options that are available. So there's like kind of flexible learning options. It's usually either an 8-hour in-person course or a 5.5-hour online on Zoom course with about 2 hours of like self-paced asynchronous work. So there's kind of flexible options for people. And then, yeah, people are certified to be able to provide this support. One of the things that does kind of worry me about mental health first aid is one of the things that I see happening is people with decision-making power often look at this like, oh, it's just a checkbox we have to check, like, cool, we did it, got it, good. But I think we need to be a little bit more mindful around it. Like having one mental health first aider on set is probably not enough. We need to have multiple people, because if you are only having one mental health first aider on set, that is a lot of responsibility and weight on that one person's shoulders. And then that could cause its own kind of mental health ripple effect crisis. So I think best practice is to have many people trained so that there's multiple people who can help provide this support.
When
So
I
yeah.
think about the mental health first aid certificate, when I found out about it, my immediate thought was anybody who is the head of a department on set should have a mental health first aid certification. Because if you are leading a team, in my opinion, you are responsible for the well-being of that team. And that person has a bigger voice and a bigger accessibility to everyone in their department, and should, given their paycheck, absolutely be, these are ways that we can create more safe spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it also speaks to why I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but one of the other kind of easy, simple things to implement is this idea of process groups where people can like, so mental health first aiders who've responded to things can come and talk, or people can come and just discuss like, how's this work been for you? How's your mental health? Having that outlet can be so huge, especially like in a group setting. So I think we often think of like individual therapy and like that's really great, but I think there's something about like peer support that can also be really powerful. So I just wanted to highlight that alongside this conversation. One of the things that I also think about when I think about mental health first aid is it's a really great start, and it's also not enough. And I hate saying that because it's like, oh, great, another thing like this, what? But I think that mental health first aid is a really, really good start. But often what I find when I do my trainings is that people are left with like wanting more, and they have more questions, and like really specifically around suicide prevention and intervention. Mental health first aid gives you like, really basic skills, but I think there's an opportunity to be able to provide people with even more. And there is a training that I just want to plug called ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. And it's provided by an agency actually in Canada called Living Works. And it's a workshop, it's a 2-day workshop where people will learn skills to be able to recognize when someone might be thinking about suicide specifically, and be able to provide intervention that kind of really addresses suicide and help people develop a safety plan. So it takes mental health first aid and it sort of goes even deeper into that specific area. So I think it would be such a beautiful follow-up for places that are already using mental health first aid to be able to then provide assist as well. So I just wanted to plug that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important plug, given the 55% of us are contemplating or attempting suicide. So I think that is really important. And having that additional training is so helpful, because I have received the suicide training as a coach. In my profession, I need to know how to respond if I believe someone is suicidal. And it's really scary in the moment to bring that up. It can be really it takes practice to bring immediacy into those situations. And I have in my coaching practice had to bring those suicide risk assessment questions immediately into a moment when I felt a client was at risk. And I'm lucky. My dad's a social worker, so I always have someone that I can reach out to if I'm unsure or contemplating or making sure that I handled things correctly. But not everyone has that. I understand. And I think the more of us that know how to really hone and utilize that skill, the more of us will survive this industry,
Yeah,
in my opinion.
absolutely.
What
Absolutely.
what would you say some of the common misconceptions around mental health first aid are, if any?
Um, I think there's like misconceptions around like if we talk about it, it's gonna this is now gonna be a problem or something. Like I think there's a lot of that sort of like mental health stigma that continues to persist where it's like if we talk about mental health, then it's gonna be a problem. So let's like not talk about it. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, these are already problems that are happening, and it's actually like preventative and actually like cost effective to be able to provide this type of training and support.
Yeah.
I think that's another one of the misconceptions is that it's like expensive and you're not going to get a return on your investment. But if you think of the amount of lost revenue or money or whatever that happens as a result of untreated or unrecognized mental health, in terms of call outs, in terms of if there is a crisis that kind of shuts down production. There's so many things that can be done to prevent those things from happening. And so it's actually cost effective. So there's a lot of misconception around like cost.
I also
Um,
think there's a big return in investment in having a crew that feels safe and happy to be working. Because not only do those people want to return to that show, they're eager and happy to work, but scientifically, we know our brain just works better when we are happy. It's actually very much restricted, and creativity cannot flow if you're under a tremendous amount of stress. So, like, you also get, in my opinion, a better project if you invest in the mental well being of your creative team and your crew.
Absolutely. I envision like part of WECA, I think we talk about this a lot. I envision like what will this industry look like in terms of like some of the creative projects that are
Mm.
built when we take care of people's mental health and trauma. Like, can you imagine like the greater depth of story and greater depth of creativity that can be created if we, you know what I mean? Like it's
Yes.
like it's such an untapped potential.
Yes, I agree
Yeah.
completely. Our industry is really high pressure, and oftentimes you need to be able to adapt and resolve things like not today, but like yesterday, what strategies do you recommend for maintaining like a work-life balance under these types of pressures and expectations?
Yeah. Ooh, that is such a really good question, Jess. I think I think when I think of answering this question, I think of like sort of two levels. I think of like the individual responsibility and then sort of the collective and like systemic responsibility.
Yeah.
And from the collective and systemic responsibility, I think like we need to look at shorter days on set. Like that is a starting place. We do not need to be working this this level of length of days. Like we don't need to be working at this level, and there's actually a lot of problems that happen with fatigue and risk when we are making people work 12-hour days, 14-hour days. Like what are we doing?
What
you
are the
know
statistics on the amount of crew members and cast members who have died driving home after a long day of set? That's what
I
I need to Google that.
yeah.
I'm grateful that the productions I've worked on recently, they've started, if we go for an extensive hours, they offer like Ubers and taxi reimbursements and stuff. Um, but even that, I even personally struggle with that because I'll be so exhausted at the end of the night and I'll still just, I'm like, oh, I don't want to leave my car. I just want to get home and have it. And then how would I get to work the next morning? Like it's not, we don't always make the smartest decisions when we're tired either. I guess I'm calling myself out here a little bit.
Not at all. And like back to the, quality of the art that can be created. Like, how can you create quality, beautiful art that speaks to others when you're exhausted?
I was working on a show where I signed like a 10+1 contract. And, we were told they're going to be very reasonable days. It's in studio, so it's all good. And then the call sheets just went out the window, and the days would end up being easily 14, if not 18-hour days. And I would just remember sitting there and feeling so trapped. And it's not that I don't love my job. I love my job. I love this industry. I love the people that I work with, but I also want to go home. I also want to
Yeah.
sleep. I also want to be there for my cat who is at
Yeah.
home by herself for that expensive amount of time. It's not an ungrateful, but just like feeling that level of trap of like, I can't go home because the day's still going and I have no idea now when the day is going to end because we're completely off call sheet. And now I just feel stuck and I
Yeah.
hate feeling trapped in my
Yeah.
workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the question of what can we individually do to kind of elevate our own um, mental health and well-being. And I always have a little bit of a hard time answering this question because I think there's too much of an emphasis placed on individuals and not enough emphasis placed on changing the system.
Mhm.
So I just want to say that as like a sort of preface to my answer to this question, because we cannot continue to put this pressure on individuals. We have to change the system, period. So that part is like, a part of it. But at the same time, we do have some responsibility that we can take for our own mental health and well-being. And so some of those things I think, is really just being unapologetic about your self-care, period. Like and you can create your own self-care plan, like what are the things that feel good to you? Like what are the things that help to refill your cup? Be it exercise, be it meditation, be it spending time in nature, be it finding creative outlets that are not work, right? Like for you, trying something new, spending time with family, friends, like whatever it is, I encourage people to like take some time and just get out a journal page and journal like what is my self-care plan? What are the things that I can do to elevate my emotional well-being and be unapologetic about it? It's okay to say no. I heard a long time ago, and I think it's been repeated many times, but saying no is a full sentence.
I
No,
love that word. Yeah.
just no. If it's something that's going to um, cause a drain on your emotional and mental well-being, it's okay to say no. And I think it's okay to say no to projects too. I think we this industry kind of teaches people that don't say no. Like you're never going to get these opportunities again. If you say no, you're going to cut off this potential work later on. And it's like, we have to kind of question some of that in ourselves and like, no, like this project doesn't speak to me, or no, like these people I don't really want to work with, or yeah, this is great money, but like, no, just
Well,
no.
there's a lot of fear too of like, if I
Yeah.
don't take this, when is the next contract going to be? Who
Yeah.
knows when my next job might be? And there's financial stress. There's very real um, risk factors for people in this industry, especially given the current strikes. And I know here in Canada, we've lost a lot of our productions because they're cutting down budgets for these networks. So there are like very real stressors and fears that people have to navigate in this. And it can be, that's why I got this tattoo for anyone who's, I guess you're watching, but it says, is it true? Because it's a question that for me, when all that fear comes up, because that fear is trying to keep us safe, and it does that by preventing us from doing the things that we want to do, to be like, no, 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 like that's too risky. It reminds me of really asking myself, like, is the fear I'm feeling, is it true? Like, do I have evidence to prove this to me?
I love that. It it makes me think of one of the things I talk to clients a lot about as a therapist is just like, these cognitive behavioral therapy principles of like, examining the evidence and like the way in which we talk to ourselves, the thoughts that we have. We can't control a lot of things in our life. We can't control politics, weather, other people, production schedule. Like there's so many things we can't control, but we can control how we talk to ourselves. We truly can. It takes work. It's like exercising your brain muscle. But you can do it. And actually it's like the key to becoming like your own brain wizard. I often tell people is like, you can control your brain chemistry and here's how, but it kind of takes that work and that effort and that consistency. So I love that you have it tattooed on you because it's just kind of always there. Like it's just a reminder, like, is this thought that I'm being true?
Even recently, it really worked for me because I have worked a total of 17 days since December 12th, 2023 in this industry. And I've gone through a big breakup. I've had to move homes. I've gone through a massive grieving process. I've had, bills piling up. And I had so much fear about what this chapter would look like, or, do I need a job? Do I need to be like continually like it's not that I haven't been applying for jobs. I've been applying, I've been trying. And I had so much fear around my financial stability or where my next job was going to be. And all these was contemplating taking jobs that aren't in alignment. But when I actually stopped and I asked myself, is it true? When I examined the evidence to see whether or not I was in a dangerous space, if I needed to be reacting out of fear, if I needed to go into survival mode, the answer was no. The industry and the people around me who were struggling and having all these fearful thoughts about the work and the jobs were influencing my own feeling about the current state in which I am in. But when I examined where I'm at, when I examined my finances, when I examined what I was doing to get my jobs, my community, my network, I couldn't find any evidence that I was unsafe. I've set myself up for so much success. I've applied so many tools in my life that I'm actually okay right now. And I don't need to be leaning into these fear-based thoughts. And the relief I felt in that moment was astronomical. The fear isn't always real. It's not.
Fear is a liar, right?
Fear is a liar. And another thought that came up to me during this time was like, you're not unemployed, you're a freelancer. If I wanted to be employed all the time, I could get a 9-to-5 job somewhere utilizing the skills that I have. But I don't want that. I want this freedom. And I've applied things into my life to make this possible for myself. So instead of punishing myself for being out of work, reframing that thought of this is time for me, or I get to choose what I do with this time, or now I have time to go into my own creative projects that fulfill me and refill my cup so that I can then go on to my paid projects that are other people's passion dreams. There's new ways that we can work around this. Now you are doing a PhD dissertation currently, correct? And that explores the mental health and well-being for workers in the entertainment industry. Can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek into your findings or any surprising insights that you have discovered from that dissertation?
I wish I had a better answer for this one. I am in a PhD program, like very, very part-time, meaning I'm taking like one class a term. So I haven't actually gotten to my dissertation portion yet. I'm still very much in kind of the discovery phase of what my research is going to look like. I am considering trying to replicate maybe the study that was done in the UK, the Looking Glass survey, and replicating it here, because what we know about research and kind of robust findings and really truly speaking to what this issue is and how to respond appropriately is if we have more robust research that's kind of replicated across like both industries, but also specifically in this case, like countries and like geographical location and like populations of people, then we have just a greater understanding, like more robust research, right? Like a greater understanding of what the issue is. So I'm considering replicating that. I'm also considering potentially reaching out to mental health first aid in the States. I know they have some grants for PhD research specifically. Um, so yeah, and then I'm also very interested in specifically looking at post-production work. I think that post-production is one of those areas of the industry that I think gets forgotten a lot.
Mm.
You often hear of the term like fix it in post, right? Like just send it to post, fix it in post. And
Yeah.
you think of people working in post-production and they're working in generally little offices by themselves with just a computer for hours and hours and hours, like no sunlight, just like I just think about the mental health of people in post a lot. And actually WECA just gave a presentation to the Los Angeles post-production group in February where we really talked about a lot of these things. And in fact, the Looking Glass survey, the research that I've been referencing this entire time, they found that 2 out of 3 workers who were working in post-production received insufficient support when specifically dealing with distressing content. So you think of people editing,
Oh,
scenes over and over and over of violence, of trauma, of whatever it is, war, whatever it is,
sexual
and then
abuse.
sexual abuse, yeah, physical abuse, like and they're kind of editing this over and over and over, what that does to their psyche over time. And so I find myself continually being kind of drawn to post as an area where we can really do better with trauma-informed principles. And I'm exploring a potential dissertation specifically on supporting post-production folks in particular. So
That is
that's the
so
that's the sneak peek preview I have. It's not maybe exactly what you were looking for, but that's where I'm at.
That's so fascinating. And honestly, it just makes me want to continue following you and keeping up with what you're finding. And hopefully, the people listening to will join you on your social pages and your website to continue to see these new research and findings, because that
Yeah.
is so fascinating. And to me, what sparked even in that conversation was like our like the news editors who are editing like shootings and like real life actual traumas, because we know that you can get secondhand trauma from having to watch those things over and over and over again, being exposed to that regularly. So I don't even know anything about the news world, but I really hope they have some sort of supports in place for their workers as well.
Makes me think of like documentary, right? Like I mean
Yes.
like unscripted, but like documentary, um yeah, just the amount of like traumatic exposure that can happen in that world specifically. So I think there's a lot of areas for potential research and obviously like some more support for people.
In unscripted TV, I believe I've never worked in post production, but I've been exposed to post production in terms of like I know people who work in it, or I've been on sets where they're editing while they're shooting. Like there's a very tight turnaround, and I've seen people like literally sleep in the edit suites, like just taking little naps so that they can meet these really tight deadlines. And
Yeah.
I mean, the question that I'm constantly thinking about is how much are we willing to sacrifice of our humans in order to make art? Like, when is the art pushing it too far? Where
Mm,
are these lines? Because I think that's where I also hear resistance from higher ups in terms of this work is you're going to reduce my level of creativity. If we have to think about people's feelings all the time, we're never going to be able to create the art or the cinematic masterpiece that we had envisioned. Treating people as if they're disposable rather than seeing them as the resources. And there has to be more creativity in how we make this art. And I think intimacy coordinators have been a great resource in this very concept of they have not decreased our ability to have sexual and explicit scenes, but they've made it a safer process for the performers and the crew members. And I think that's what we're getting with our mental health support. We're not trying to reduce the creativity. We're trying to support it with these resources and tools.
Yeah. Oh, if I may, I just want to
Please.
bring up, because you brought up the intimacy coordinators, and that role is just fantastic, so important, doing such great work. And they are being tasked with fulfilling this mental health need. And very often they don't have the training, the tools, or maybe even the desire to, be doing that work, or the recognition, right?
Or the
And so,
capacity. Like they're so, they're there to do their specific job, just like a camera operator is there to do their specific job. That's where their energy is focusing. They can't look at the mental health care of everybody else when they're there and hired to think of the personal care of very specific people, I believe, from my understanding.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. I agree. And I just want to just call that out, because in my research and just talking to people, that's my heart just goes out to intimacy coordinators. I think they're doing a lot, and I think they're taking on a lot of the burden. And so hopefully we can build something where we can offload some of that burden, so they're not.
I would love to have an intimacy coordinator on this podcast and hear more about what they do and maybe some of the pressures they're facing in what you've just pinpointed. We've talked a lot about multiple resources, things that we're noticing in the industry, mental health first aid. What final messages would you like to leave our listeners with about the importance of trauma-informed care in the entertainment industry?
Short answer is sort of WECA's tagline, which is #we must do better. We must do better. We cannot continue with the way things are. We are harming people. There are far too many people attempting to take their life, have taken their life, falling into substance abuse, challenges. There's far too many people leaving the industry. It doesn't have to be this way, and we must do better. It would be my first message. And my second message is, it's not that hard. It's not hard, and it's not scary. We can do this, and we can do it well, and we can do it relatively easily, and it's not that expensive, and you will get a return on investment for doing it. Don't listen to people who say it's not possible, because it is possible and it's happening. And so again, want to plug like Ava DuVernay, Barry Jenkins here in the States, to leaders who are in this industry, who are making these waves and doing this change. So look to the people who are helping, look to the people who are doing the work, who are making the change. It is possible. And but we can't do it alone. And we can't do it in a competitive way either, which is really hard. Capitalism wants to keep us competitive and at each other's throats, and scarcity mindset wants us to continue to feel like there's not enough work, or like it's not possible. But we can do this, and we can do it in a way that's collaborative and that really takes care of one another. So that's my message.
I think that's a beautiful message, and I couldn't agree more. Shaina, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. This has been a fantastic conversation with so much juice for people to take away from this. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Jess. I really appreciate it.
Now time for the legal stuff. This podcast is presented to you solely for educational and entertainment purposes. I may be a professionally certified coach myself, but hosting a podcast is not coaching. This podcast should not be used in substitution of working with a licensed therapist, doctor, coach, or other qualified professionals. Copy that? Amazing. See you on the next episode. Nothing but love, Jess.